Welcome to State of Us Election 2020, Joe's new politics show where over the next few weeks we'll be discussing everything to do with this election. Each week Joe's head of politics, Ellen Coyne, and Ireland's best columnist.
I like greatest.
You like greatest? You prefer greatest?
Yeah, it's more quantifiable.
Okay. Yeah. How do you find it more quantifiable?
I think it's easier to have grades of greatness, whereas best is a very spectral thing.
Right. We haven't even given your name because
people
know once I say
yes, of course,
Ireland's greatest columnist, they know who I'm talking
yeah.
about. But in case you don't, it's Carl Kinsella.
Yeah. I'm sorry, everyone.
Yes, so this is the State of Us, and each week we're going to discuss all things to do with the election. We're not going to say we're only going to focus on the issues, or we won't deal with trivialities, because maybe we will. But we will try not to get giddy about an internal party battle in a constituency. And I promise, if anyone uses the term senior hurling, they will be escorted from the building, and I'll try to expel them from
cricket metaphors only for us.
There are no football metaphors. There are no sports metaphors allowed, but certainly not senior hurling. Is you're expelled. But anyway, the election was called this week after weeks of breathless speculation about the election date. The election was called for a date that nobody had breathlessly speculated about, and we're beginning a campaign, and the election is kind of in two parts really. It's the campaign and the vote, and then the interminable time afterwards when the actual government will be formed. But we've started in a week with an awful lot has happened. We've got a slogan from Fine Gael, which is a future to look forward to. Fine Gael seem to be running on the future, even though they've been in power for 9 years at this stage. But Ellen, what is at stake in this election, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's always the future. And if I had had such a traumatising experience with the slogan in 2016 as Fine Gael did, I of course would have picked the most obvious, boring, dull slogan as well. They may as well have just had please vote for us. But it is always about the future. And I think in particular for younger people, this one can feel a bit more esoteric because of the desperate need to act on climate action, the fact that any of the parties who have the best manifestos on that will have to risk being in the political wilderness forever if they go into power and try to dilute Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael and get cancelled in the process. And the second problem, if you're basing it on being the future, obviously that refers specifically to young people, is the fact that a lot of our major cities are literally becoming inhospitable. And while a lot of the parties are obviously talking about housing, I think it's the number one issue for this election, a lot of it seems to be focused on this idea that we still fetishise about home ownership. But I think in the short term, any of us who spend any time on social media can see tons of our friends putting up statuses about moving to Glasgow, Manchester, Berlin. And I think when I think about the future, that's the thing that I think of first.
Carl, you've said that this is a election where Ireland doesn't really want anyone to be the next Taoiseach.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of not just anecdotal, but I mean, polling suggests that, the very most support that a party can muster is around 30%. So basically you're in a situation where no matter who you vote for when you go out on election day, the vast majority of the country is voting for somebody else. So no matter who you like, whether you like Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil or Sinn Féin, there's this huge swathe of people out there who think you're wrong and who are going to hate your choice of Taoiseach and who are going to hate your choice of TD. So we're in a situation where, as we saw with the last election in 2016, had a hung doll, a protracted situation where there's kind of crisis talks and working out who's going to go into government with who. Very likely that the same thing will happen again, and maybe even worse, because I mean it's hard to see Fine Gael just doing a switcheroo and propping up Fianna Fáil now in a reversal of what we have. So I think going back to what's at stake is in some ways very little and in some ways everything, because I think the reality of it is we're going to have a government that people don't want, no matter who ends up in government. I think people are still going to be unhappy. So I mean the future is at stake, but unfortunately it seems like the only outcome is just vast displeasure.
But that doesn't. So is there really that much at stake? Because this is the thing that I think we might try and push back against on this show, because there's an awful lot of excitement around an election, and it has started quite dramatically with events. But when you put it like that, it doesn't seem like much is going to change, and so you're going to have this situation where whatever anger is out in the country, and I think everybody's probably agreed there is a lot of anger with a lot of, for a lot of different reasons. We saw the farmers protesting yesterday. For different reasons, there are a lot of people unhappy out there, but their unhappiness isn't going to really be sated by this election.
But that's not what elections, an election, expecting that sort of snap reform is what you're talking about there is more a revolution than an election, I think.
It's going to take more than 400 tractors. We're going to need 1,000 tractors.
Okay, right. We need double the tractors.
Yeah, double the tractors.
I guess the key question is, a lot of the anger is around obviously health and housing, which is kind of that's an evergreen problem. But I guess the key thing is, if you've had almost a decade and 2 terms in power, how many terms are Fine Gael saying that they need before you can get a house with a reasonable amount of money and hospital care within a reasonable amount of time? But I guess the point is, we just, with any of the other parties, you just kind of have to take their word for it, because I haven't really heard any kind of reforms that would sate that anger straight away.
Well, if you are talking about, and we will get into this later in terms of the debate, but if you are talking about the TV debate, but if you are talking about Leo Varadkar versus Micheal Martin as the 2 potential, most likely, the only people who are going to be Taoiseach, what would you say in health and housing are the differences, except, Fianna Fáil seems to be a little bit fuzzier and warmer. Well, would that be correct? Just a kind of, without actually having any specifics, it's kind of maybe we can be a bit nicer and not as cold and robotic.
Well, you'd say reputationally Fianna Fáil would build more social housing. I think you would expect Fianna Fáil to build more social housing. Obviously, then you'd also expect all the pitfalls that come with having a Fianna Fáil government, which anyone who has lived in Ireland for longer than 10 years at any point will be aware of. Because if we're returning to a situation where developers have free rein to do whatever they want, and bankers have free rein to do whatever they want, then that's not what people want either. So I think at the end, and of course, what needs to be remembered is that Fianna Fáil have signed off on the vast majority of what Fine Gael have done throughout the confidence and supply agreement since 2016. So to think that they're very ideologically separate is crazy. Whether they're warmer and fuzzier, I don't know. Where's that coming? I'm
probably thinking of Micheal Martin versus Leo Varadkar.
He's warm and obviously Leo Varadkar is he's like the Tin Man from.
Well, I think the most likeable thing about Leo Varadkar is his inability to have polite conversations or make small talk. I relate to that.
Sort of like a C3PO kind of C3PO.
Yeah, well, I find that that's. I think they should push it. I can't make small talk either. That would be my slogan if I was Leo Varadkar.
Yeah, that would be quite the radical approach to take when people are pointing at empty sites in the Midlands where there's vaguely might be some sort of community hub in 10 years, and just to tell them that you honestly don't give a shit and would rather get back in your car and go back to Dublin.
I'm not good at expressing. I'm not good at bridging the time from the initial part of the conversation to the time we start talking about
what you actually want to know.
What I want to talk about.
If there's one thing I like about Leo Varadkar, it's that I get the sense that if I was on a bus and he got on the bus, he wouldn't sit next to me, and that's great. I want to be left alone. But do you
want that in a leader?
Yeah, well, that's it. As far as communities in distress, I think he definitely doesn't see. Whenever any tragedy happens or whenever anything goes wrong and it's put to him, it always seems like his immediate response is to either shirk the blame or just shake his head and just have an extremely cold response that's our homelessness is worse in other countries, or every country has a poor healthcare system, that's not good enough.
I think that's actually what he would see that as is almost like pragmatism to a fault. And I think you saw it in the interview that he did with Brendan O'Connor when he was asked about cancer treatment for younger people, or last week, God, it was only last week, when that elderly woman was found on the streets of Dublin. And he just sees it as, he can't see the individual case. What he sees is the pragmatic thing of health services for children are getting better. Why won't the media let me argue this instead of focusing on this one case or this one child? Or I have this Rebuilding Ireland programme. Why is the media asking me to focus on this one it is a cold way of looking at things, but it's probably his academic ultra pragmatic way, and I think that's when he gets ultra defensive and comes across as cold and unfeeling.
He did it when he was on Ireland Unfiltered, and I've noticed he repeated the same thing on that Brendan O'Connor interview when he talked about children growing up in emergency accommodation. If you use that expression, he says, well, the average time anyone spends in emergency accommodation, any family, is 6 months. So people aren't growing up in emergency accommodation, as if that is I've clinched the argument with that point. And because, as you say, it is the fact he has the statistics.
Yeah, he's completely correct.
Yeah, but it's not.
But it horrifies people to hear it, because you want, like, you know, with politicians, the clever ones at least have the cop on to. This sounds really like cynical. The cop on to at least pretend to care. You have to do the like head to the side thing. These are all tragic cases. We should all be ashamed of them. But straight away he's like, no, my government is doing X, Y, Z. It's making things slowly better. Why aren't I getting the credit for it? Why am I being it? Why is this conspiracy against me?
Whereas Fianna Fáil, to finish my warm and fuzzy point, Micheal Martin does
better pretending to care, basically.
But he does seem to have, he has better empathy skills,
better people skills, 100%.
But the problem with Fianna Fáil, I guess, is I hadn't really, when you start paying attention to them, this only struck me yesterday looking at their Brexit press conference, and suddenly I become aware for the very first time that Sean Haughey is their is their spokesperson on European foreign affairs. It's like what this is what we're going to get. Like, you vote for Micheal Martin, get Sean Haughey, and like, do we want Sean Haughey on the international stage or even on the national stage or any stage?
But like, the thing is, at the end of the day, you say, like, again with Varadkar, it's a situation where he can point to numbers and things slowly improving, but also at the same time his pragmatism doesn't extend as far as, like, say like a hospital overcrowding being the worst it's been and like homelessness numbers going up. So it's kind of like he's only pragmatic kind of when he's got the figures that suit him, and then when the figures don't suit him, he'll just overlook it. As far as Sean Haughey, like, I mean, I don't know. Like, this is what I think a big problem that people have with Fianna Fáil, right, is that Micheal Martin definitely seems like a more likeable, to use your word, warm, the Chewbacca to Leo Varadkar C-3PO, if you will, or the Baby Yoda even. But yeah, like with like Micheal Martin, it's like you vote for Micheal Martin and you're going to have people put in the cabinet who maybe the country isn't crazy about, like, for example, the TDs who are involved with the Votegate problem, where they're kind of like voting for each other. Timmy Dooley is definitely someone who would possibly be in a cabinet. Sean Haughey, someone who possibly be in a cabinet, and all the associations that come with his last name.
Well, well, look, we might get more into that if we talk about Brexit a bit later, but we'll go back to what we were, housing, which is going to be a big issue, and it was the thing that and homelessness which kickstarted this campaign, and then did demonstrate that cliche, if it is a cliche, that events can derail whatever campaign, whatever planned campaign there is. But we were like that was a kind of a shocking start to the campaign. Ellen, like, maybe from the how you saw it going from a Fine Gael point of view, from a Leo Varadkar, Owen Murphy point of view, this, the story of the man sleeping in a tent in Grand Canal who was horrific, sustained horrific life-changing injuries. Like, did that sort of capture what is wrong with Fine Gael's housing policy?
100%, and you can see why they're trying to lead on Brexit and lead on the future, because they obviously can't lead this campaign on their health or housing records. And no matter what way they'd started the campaign, like, they were up in the border counties, I think, when these stories were breaking, housing was always going to come to the fore. And I think it could have been handled better if the Taoiseach didn't make that mistake of trying to defer the blame or defer the focus, sorry, is a better, more accurate way of explaining it, onto Paul McAuliffe, the Fianna Fáil Lord Mayor, who's also a major threat to Noel Rock in Dublin Northwest. Like, that did make it political very quickly, and I know he dismissed that claim when it was put to him at the press conference, but again, that air of defensiveness when you're talking about the number one issue that makes people most emotional, most angry at the government, they should have had the cop on if they could see it derailing the kind of Brexit border county start to their campaign. They should have known that was going to happen. They should have been prepared to handle it better.
And his note that, like, we've offered this man emergency accommodation in the past, we'll offer it again. It's just like, well, aren't you a hero? As in, trying to paint themselves as, look, we're doing all the right things. If someone ends up upended into a dump truck, that, I can't be blamed for that. And it just that obviously it just doesn't sit right with anybody.
I wouldn't like the phrase known to homeless services become like the phrase known to Gardaí.
Exactly.
When it's popping up in coverage. Like, I think that was a big mistake as well. And like, trying to push it onto the Lord Mayor is like trying to hold Michael D. Higgins responsible for crimes that take place in the Phoenix Park. Like, that was because
that wasn't even like, I can see, like, the criticism of Micheal Martin came out with this, that they were politicising it. Like, everyone was politicising it.
Well, it's a political issue.
It is a political issue, so it's like, it's going to be politicised. But to me, it was like, Why is he politicising it to the... has the Lord Mayor got any responsibility for this?
It's a largely like ceremonial role. Like I've in covering like politics for like 5 or 6 years, I've never really heard anybody ask the Lord Mayor's office to comment on cases like that. And unfortunately, over the last few years, we've had loads of tragic cases of homeless people being badly injured or dying on the streets. I've never heard anybody from Fine Gael point the spotlight on the Lord Mayor's office, and it just came off as kind of gross.
So it was an attempt because of this, constituency battle, the stuff where don't really reflect what matters to people. Yeah. Like that was the reason why Leo Varadkar pushed it into that direction.
It felt offensive. Like I can get it. Of course, that story would have made them panic. And maybe his political instinct was to push it onto Fianna Fáil, because that's your instinct with every other issue as it comes up. You're not building enough houses. Well, Fianna Fáil left the place in an absolute state. So it's the same formula that's used for everything. But again, to not have the cop on to see that this is an empathetic, highly emotional, distressing, horrific story that you don't use the same formula for, I think shows that like those... It's like the piece in The Independent during the week that said like he's his own worst enemy and his own best asset. Like that kind of brilliant political response can be the best thing ever in a live debate. But when you're faced with this kind of story about a homeless person, to respond in that instinctive way, in a political way, is a terrible thing.
Carl, where do you see this from the point of view? You did a report from the Grand Canal, and like it's in Owen Murphy's constituency.
Yeah.
What do you think this does for Owen Murphy? Because whatever Varadkar and the pluses and minuses of how he comes across, like is Owen Murphy sort of the toxic brand for Fine Gael?
Obviously this did happen in the constituency of the Minister for Tact and Good Timing, Owen Murphy, who's his canvassers had a poster up directly above where the man's tent had been moved into the truck. I think he's probably more toxic than Leo Varadkar, certainly. Like I think obviously you've had a situation where 2 motions of no confidence have been called in him. It's the kind of thing where he has been in his position, he's overseen this rampant increase in rents, rampant increase in homelessness, and that he also doesn't give much of a sense that, like we heard in the opening music, that like things like referring to co-living spaces as if they're boutique luxury hotels, or even framing co-living spaces which cost $1,300 a month as a solution to the homelessness problem or to the housing problem, when in fact they're for wealthy people, they're for people who probably already support Fine Gael and are probably already on board with what's happening in the country. So I think, you've got a situation where Owen Murphy is certainly not winning any new voters. And I think as time goes on and these problems get worse, he's probably alienating current Fine Gael voters.
And is that something that is going to, it did seem on that first day as this was happening that Leo Varadkar could be on course for a kind of Theresa May style, like 2017 election collapse. Now it doesn't, like they've events which we'll get into, other events have overtaken that and taken the spotlight off them. But is that still something that is a possibility, that this campaign, if they continue to demonstrate this kind of tone deaf outlook, which is essential, like as we talked about, it does seem to be the one thing that you'd need in a campaign, that they will be damaged, and then you could be on the brink of the progressive, visionary, radical Fianna Fáil government.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But is it something you think is a concern for Fine Gael?
Yeah, like I think we kind of forget, because Leo Varadkar has been the Taoiseach for so long now, that this is his first general election campaign leading the party. And back when he was fighting Simon Coveney for the job, the big thing that everyone in Fine Gael was saying was he's so electorally successful, like he's going to bring us into this amazing majority government. So there's a lot of pressure on him, and I guess the concern is he's very telegenic. He's going to be really good on the debates, as will Micheal Martin. But how will he be out in rural Ireland by week 3 when the public start giving more of a shit about the election and start getting angry? I remember in 2016 during the Keep the Recovery Going thing, following Enda Kenny around and just having people just yelling absolute dogs abuse at him from one end of the country, from one end of the week to the next. And again, that defensiveness that Leo Varadkar has, I don't know how he'll cope
You were in Longford with him yesterday, and what was like? And is there anything you can gauge from seeing how he interacts with the public?
Like canvassing with politicians, it's impossible. Anybody who claims to know what the country is thinking is absolutely talking through their hole, because all you get is people coming up to him going, "Thank you so much for salvaging the country from Fianna Fáil," and then other people in prison vans like calling him the C word and like flipping their finger at him. But they brought him into like a very Fine Gael cafe on Longford Town, which is like a cafe / clothes shop / brow bar, and like very like, you know, Fine Gael-y, like successful business. And this woman spotted that he was in there, just a woman that was passing on the street, and like elbowed herself in and was really excited, was trying to take a selfie with Leo Varadkar in the background. And in the end I had to take the picture for her, of her looking at the camera and just Leo Varadkar's back. But that was enough for her to be like absolutely thrilled. And I think I saw Maria Walsh there, the Fine Gael MEP, talking to the woman, and she was like, "Oh, you know, are you trying to get a selfie with the Taoiseach?" She was like, "Yeah, so excited." And she was like, "And are you going to be voting for Fine Gael?" And the woman was like, "Oh, definitely not." So like he has like that, like with Taoiseachs, the Irish public will always respond in a certain way to them like that. But Leo Varadkar does kind of have that more celebrity sheen to him, and because this is his first time doing a national campaign, there'll be a lot of people in counties down the country that have never met him before, and I'd be cautious in Fine Gael if I was like going to try to convert the rate of selfie requests into vote transfers. I don't think that's actually going to happen. So I think like it's probably one of the most exciting elections because it's a little bit more open and a little bit more hard to predict.
Carl, how do you see it, like from that point of view, from the point of view of a campaign?
Well, like obviously we saw the clip of the woman challenging him on honestly like a pretty straightforward complaint. Like what kind of gets me is, you know, she was kind of accused him of putting the interests of corporations and parasite landlords ahead of, you know, the interests of regular people. And that to me seems like if you're a Fine Gael, that's like complaint 101. Like, you know, that's the first thing you have an answer ready for. And he didn't seem to have an answer ready for that, and he just kind of got the hell out of there. Like a comms person came between the young woman and Varadkar, and he just briskly walked off. And, you know, we found her, we chatted to her, and we did a report on it on Joe. And like, as you can see, like, you know, the kind of numbers and traffic and traction that thing gets is huge. So I think you don't want to develop as a campaigner, you don't want to develop a reputation as someone who gets out of there as soon as you're confronted with the most basic of accusations or complaints. You know, it's not as if he was being challenged on something earth-shattering. He was literally being told, "I think you prioritise landlords over renters," which you would think he'd have an answer for. If he doesn't have an answer for that, like, then what in God's name does he have an answer
But do
for?
we, again, like if you look at the recent election in the UK, like a lot of too much emphasis was put, you know, by people like us who are on social media all the time
for
on
sure,
what we were hearing on social media. And, you know, what I noticed about that incident, you know, and, you know, your story on it got a lot of traction, as you say, in the actual main evening news. It didn't even feature. So the people who are I don't think it did feature. But the people who are getting their news from, you know, the mainstream media. I should actually escort myself from the building there. I meant to say that also is out along with senior hurling, so I'm going to remove myself as presenter of the show. But the people, that stuff isn't necessarily being reflected. We can see a lot of anger in these things. We can see the stuff, but the people who are actually paying a little bit of attention aren't paying attention to that stuff.
I more so mean like on the ground, right? If you're a natural born campaigner, like if you're some kind of Bill Clinton type who shakes every hand and you're warm and you're friendly with everyone, and you're confronted with that extremely straightforward complaint, like you should be able, like, I think a natural campaigner would see that as an opportunity to come across really well, whereas he sees it as a crisis situation that he needs to get out of right away. And I think that's not going to stand to him when he's in Longford and when he's in Cavan and Monaghan. If you have a situation where he's very civilly confronted with, you know, a very basic bit of, you know, anti-Fine Gael rhetoric, if he's going to dart for the hills right away, then people are, you know, if he's all across the country doing that, people aren't going to, it doesn't reflect well on him. And it won't reflect well on Fine Gael, I don't think.
Varadkar then, you know, the kind of breathless nature of the campaign itself was sort of emphasised then by day two when Sinn Féin were the party on the defensive, and Varadkar was being outrageously and unfairly attacked by Sinn Féin councillor Paddy Holohan, who made comments about his heritage and other homophobic comments about him. Ellen, that story is still developing. How did you feel, first of all, that Sinn Féin handled the first stage of it, which was how Mary Lou and the party dealt with his kind of strange non-apology yesterday, but maybe you can also bring us up to speed on what's been happening since.
Yeah, I think it was a mistake. Like, Sinn Féin demanded an apology very quickly, but then when Mary Lou was out doing campaigning yesterday, she appeared to accept what most of us would describe as the non-apology apology, like, sorry for taking offence to my outrageous comments about the Taoiseach, which were homophobic and also a little bit racist. Because I could very vividly imagine Mary Lou's incredible spiel had this been a councillor from another party who had made similar claims. And I think a lot of political journalists are going to find ourselves parsing through an unbelievable amount of archive from Paddy Holohan's podcast, because earlier on today we found a clip and published a story on JOE.ie where in the same episode of the podcast, the South Dublin councillor and MMA fighter suggested that there are, to quote him, loads of underage women who are having sex with men and then blackmailing them out of sums of up to €10,000 under the threat of reporting those men for statutory rape. And these were along with some comments which just generally criticised the ethos of feminist campaigns, which suggest they would always believe victims of sexual violence. And as well, a claim that men are facing a double standard. And Paddy said that, a woman could joke about being annoyed at her fella and threatening to chop his dick off, but he couldn't joke about getting into bed with his bitch and wanting to strangle her and box the head off her.
Have Sinn Féin, you would imagine they would have listened to some of these podcasts, but this is outrageous, incredible stuff.
Yeah, like as I was saying earlier, for a podcast called No Shame, it's been the source of deep shame for Sinn Féin and probably a bit more to come.
And what has their reaction been to that?
It was super quick. Probably one of the quickest responses I've ever gotten from a party press office. They said that the comments are completely inappropriate and don't represent the views of Sinn Féin at all. And this one is going to be super problematic, because one of the things that Mary Lou has been really successful at since she took over from Gerry Adams is positioning Sinn Féin as a very forward-looking progressive feminist party that very quickly changed its position on things like repeal to come out as even more feminist than Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. These are comments that skirt very close to being like an incel manifesto. It's horrific, it's really bad. And this is just from one episode. It seems like there was very basic party vetting which fell to the side, maybe because this councillor is very popular with a certain cohort of people, comes across really well, really adds to Sinn Féin's kind of working class representation. But what has been put to me, suggested to me, is that he is somebody that that demographic looks up to.
Well, he topped the polls in the local elections. Yeah.
This is the last thing. This is what happens in general elections. He's not even, he's a councillor. He's not running for general election. But this is what your party's going to be faced with for the next few weeks. We're only on day 3. And to have someone like that have a second incident within 2 days and not have some sort of procedure to at least give the air or perception of disciplining him is really stupid.
But going back to as we're recording, he may be making another apology, but his first apology he had one point, his final words were something like he didn't seem to even accept that he may have said what he'd said on video.
There's such a distinction to be made between apologising for an act and apologising for potential offence caused by an act. He hasn't in any way, he said they were misinterpreted, and if they weren't misinterpreted then he didn't say them at all. He said I would never make such remarks, by which I guess, if I'm being generous, he meant I would never make remarks that were perceived in the way that they were perceived, which is not, that's not the way the world works. If you say what you say, you have to stand over it, or you have to clarify it or qualify it, or you have to apologise for it, you have to withdraw it. And he obviously he hasn't apologised for what he said. He's only apologised for the offence given. Varadkar himself said it was enough, the apology was enough, and I think that was probably him almost like splashing a glass cold. He must have felt so relieved when this came out, because after the day one Fine Gael had, for Sinn Féin to fumble so badly, because at the end of the day, Mary Lou McDonald said said she was satisfied that there'd been an apology, when I think everybody can see that there was no apology. And obviously, as we say, it's a developing story. You know, more things could come out. That, you know, it does seem like a failure of vetting in a massive way, which, I mean, Sinn Féin have to be extremely disappointed about that.
And what does it do? Like that, clearly this is something that needs to be addressed, and, you know, Sinn Féin have to take action on it. But the general sense, you know, this general sense of news stories coming to the fore during an election, which is just inevitable. Like, how does it, do you feel, play into this, into the idea of getting people to be interested in the bigger themes that may be part of the election? Because we'll talk about, you know, like, you know, the biggest issue facing Ireland and, you know, everyone is climate change. And yet it is, and, you know, the Greens are expected to do well, but, like, how do you think they will actually cope in a system, again, and this is the thing with the Irish electoral system, it is, you know, the cause of and solution to all our problems, because every constituency hangs on so few votes can make a difference. Like, do you think Ellen, the Greens will be successful on the big issue of climate change, and or will they have to work their constituency and concentrate on local issues as well?
I think they're probably nervous because there's a lot of expectation being put on them. And I think I heard during the week Eamon Ryan was extremely fraught that some newspaper had claimed his seat was as safe as South Dublin houses, which is like the worst thing a candidate can hear. I think we already saw, I thought, a kind of worrying inability by the Green Party to deal with those stories that will come out during an election, when Eamon Ryan made some comments about, which were perceived as him trying to take away Culchie's cars, or having a village share like a number of vehicles. Yeah. And the response was a little bit Trumpian. Like, you had people on Twitter, kind of Green Party people, bemoaning the mainstream news, which again was quoting their politician directly and publishing it and then holding him to account for it. And I mean, we were doing some interviews during the week with candidates, and I think there was Mark Ward, the Sinn Féin councillor, who was trying to spin that the Green Party are just Fine Gael on bikes. So I think like you also have the problem that the Green Party is not. We've seen a lot of like really impressive climate justice movements in Ireland over the last year. Those groups have been really careful to be apolitical. So the Green Party probably won't pick up all of the political capital that's been in moves like the schools climate strikes or Extinction Rebellion, because those groups are really keen not to let any political party kind of come in and make hay on their activism.
And also a major climb down on the reintroduction of wolves.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Was, you know, like, I think we were all disappointed.
But like, if you're going to, they're going to abandon the, you know,
like, God knows how many votes he lost with that.
Well, I couldn't believe that. I was like, you know, the car, we're backing you all the way. You stand strong on the cars, Eamon.
But no, I think,
and also the wolves, for fuck's sake.
There's got to be, like, I think in the Green Party now, there's such a kind of not a schism, but like there is a difference between the sort of TDs who were there back when they were the junior coalition party alongside Fianna Fáil, and the young councillors they have. Like, there is a very progressive young side to the Greens, which I think couldn't be further from Fine Gael. And then I think you do have the kind of older guard like Eamon Ryan, who I'd say he would never rule out, and I know he hasn't ruled out going into coalition with Fine Gael, whereas I think that would be antithetical to some of them. You were with
Saoirse McHugh this week, who was somebody who after the European elections ruled that out. How do you think she is coping with the contradictions between local and, you know, big issues, and also that sense of, is it right to be within the system as somebody campaigning for climate change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extraordinary that you have so many young people who really want to vote for the Green Party and then are going to be bitterly disappointed if they end up in power. Like, it's a weird way to go into an election. And Saoirse McHugh, I think, has made it clear that she would probably end up as an independent if the Green Party went in with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And I know that there's plenty of people in maybe Independence for Change who would be delighted to poach her. But she made a really interesting point when she was talking to us about how if you have a businessman who decides to run for Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, the business interests that he represents will keep him very close as soon as he goes into politics, and will make sure that he does always advocate for them and lobby for them and protect their interests. But if you have somebody who's an incredible activist, whether it's on climate or housing or feminism or LGBT rights, if that person goes into mainstream politics, particularly if they end up in a position where they have any sort of power or supporting a Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael government, they're effectively like excommunicated from the movement. And Saoirse was making the point that it would be a lot better if people could keep left-wing politicians as close as people on the right will, because you will have bills going through the next government where you'll absolutely have people from like the coal industry or the oil industry talking to politicians, and I think it would be fantastic if you had people from Extinction Rebellion and the climate strike in the Oireachtas outside those committee rooms talking to them as well, as we did with repeal, which is basically the last thing that went through the Oireachtas, which was seen as being completely incompatible with the system, but they ended up with a free, safe, legal law because those people engaged.
And is the problem that people think once politicians from the left go into power with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael that they have sold out, and then they're kind of, you know, they're dead to them?
Well, yeah, like, I mean, if the Greens went in with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, their entire purpose would be diluting down both of those parties and trying to push them towards more climate justice measures. And anything that, I mean, that effectively is already a compromise. But I suppose the argument is people in Extinction Rebellion would say that it's too late for compromise, that the threat is too existential. But I guess on the other side, people like Saoirse McHugh who engage in politics would argue that the fact that you're running out of time means that you have to engage with the system that you have already. Because if you're waiting for a point at which it's neither Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael that's going to be in government before you get involved in climate justice and mainstream politics, like, we'll all be dead.
Yeah, I think a lot of the skepticism comes from, like, historically, I think junior coalition parties have been like way too slow to try and flex their muscles in a partnership. Like, whereas like the Greens under Fianna Fáil just signed off on way too many unpopular measures, and like Labour in partnership with Fine Gael, where Labour had like 37 seats, so had quite a lot of sway, went back on so many promises, you know, like no increases to like student fees and all sorts of things. So like, I think people are very sceptical. I think people are quick to very much dismiss if a left-wing candidate gets elected and then goes into government, into a coalition with Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. I think they're like, people are very sceptical because we've seen in the past that you know, these left-wing progressive parties have been very much, they're like basically get ridden roughshod over, you know.
But there's not much else. If you want change, it's hard to know what you can do in that situation, because it is the fate for every smaller party most of the time when they go into coalition that they are decimated by
have to be more prepared
being in government.
They have to be more prepared to collapse a government. You know, like, I think that's what left wing people want. You know, like, that's
you
what
want. We're back to revolution.
We're back to revolution.
More tractors.
Yeah. 2,000 tractors.
2,000 tractors.
Yeah.
I think though, like, people on the left hold their own people to a higher and sometimes more unfair standard. Like, I think we ended up with a ultra pro-choice independent lesbian in the last cabinet when Catherine Zappone went in, and she was very quickly effectively cancelled by some of the people who campaigned for her when she backed the Citizens' Assembly, because it was seen as pushing repeal out. In the end, she was proven completely correct, because we ended up with a free, safe, legal law only because of the Citizens' Assembly. But when the referendum came around, everyone was talking about fucking fancying Simon Harris, and nobody was talking about Catherine Zappone, and she might lose her seat now. So I wouldn't blame someone like Saoirse McHugh for making that point, because effectively it'll be people on Twitter talking about what a disappointment she is or whatever, but like, retweets aren't going to help us when we're like underwater. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think I see both sides, and I 100% get where Extinction Rebellion are coming from keeping the climate movements apolitical. But I also think, like, all you're doing there is making sure that there is 50% of the electorate who will just continue voting for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, while the rest of us feel too apathetic to engage at all.
Well, on that note, Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael are, as we've said, the only choice for Taoiseach, but they're also, for the main debates, they're also going to be the Micheal Martin and Leo Varadkar are going to be the two people head to head for at least some of the debates. Carl, that's something that you feel shouldn't be happening.
I had a dream about this last night. And I don't want to style myself as a prophet or anything, but in the dream, Micheal Martin's trousers fell down as he was speaking, and that's, I mean, I don't even know, I don't know if that's prejudicial to like information to put out there and be like, is that going to harm his chances now that I've had this dream?
In the interest of balance, somebody has to say that they had a dream about Leo Varadkar's
exactly, yeah. And the worst part was Leo Varadkar was there like pointing and laughing, and like I was just there watching this all, and I was like, wow, this really is a dramatic election campaign. But yeah,
your subconscious is an interesting place.
Yeah, my point is that, like, obviously there is something to be said for, if you've only got two possible heads of government, to see them in a head-to-head sort of combat style TV special it makes some degree of sense. I just think it's probably not the only way that we can examine them, and I think it probably is unfair in a parliamentary system to give that much of a boost in terms of airtime and like a platform to their policies. It's a bit of it's got to be a kick in the teeth for like Sinn Féin and Independents and the Greens that they're going to be effectively cut out of a huge policy discussion that lots of people are going to watch and turn into.
But it isn't like I get your point, but we've seen it a lot in just the general election coverage so far, because like the curse of broadcasting regulations and balance means that you have all these people on, you have all these reports from campaigns as well. Everything is timed to a second, so you're actually learning nothing, or you're not learning. Everything is just like let's hit our minutes and seconds mark, and you have 6 people on a panel, and you don't learn anything. So there are only 2 people who are going to be Taoiseach. Let's have them debate. If one of their trousers falls down, then we know something about one of the people who's going to lead us. I don't know. That sounds kind of weird.
What do we know, Dion?
I'm 100% in favour of the head-to-head between Varadkar and Martin, because there's going to be a bajillion other debates in which all of them will be involved, and it'll just be the usual. And that's on morning, noon, and night on RT Radio 1, on all of the television programmes and all of the debates. The fact of the matter is that one of them is going to be the Taoiseach, and then the only thing we don't know is which mishmash of independents or left-wing parties will effectively have to prop them up. And I think that while it might not make sense for people who are left-wing and hate both Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, there's probably a lot of people who would rather know which of them is going to be the Taoiseach. And I think it actually stands to the fact that at this moment in time, both of the main parties have pretty good leaders. Like my shallow, like shitty Polcore side just wants to see the spectacle of it. But I think that this general election does have more of that kind of presidential air to it, because you're very much voting for who's going to be the Taoiseach rather than who you just rather have as your local TD.
I just think it's quite unfairly disadvantageous, like given that like it is.
But they'll have other debates. Like Sinn Féin will be on another debate. Labour will be like they don't have a chance of being the Taoiseach.
Those will be like the shouting over debate. So it means that the cleanest debate that anybody gets is going to be exclusively for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And like if you have a situation where like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are both on about 27%, Sinn Féin are on 20%, like that's obviously only like 3 up and 3 down in the difference.
There's only one poll that matters.
Right, of course. Yes.
I'm turning into the person.
You're actually getting all of the stereotypes in.
Only one wicket that, you know.
It's only half time.
But the thing is, like, if Sinn Féin could go up by 3 and Fine Gael could go down by 3, like then they're literally neck and neck in the polls. So it doesn't seem fair to have a situation where you are giving 2 hours of probably what will be the most watched debate and probably what will be the cleanest debate purely for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael policies, because it's not just going to be about personality, it is going to be about their entire platform. You know what I mean?
Like, it's the most pragmatic debate, because neither of them are going to go into power with Sinn Féin, and it's also the best thing ever for Sinn Féin as well as Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, because it adds into their persecution complex about the establishment being against them and how RTE hate them and they're afraid of them and
I'm
blah blah
delighted
blah
by that, I'm sure.
So like I just think there will be other debates where you'll have like the 5 main parties, and Mary Lou can do like her usual stick about how the 2 of them are exactly the same, and like you've seen the Sinn Féin party putting up memes about it all week from The Simpsons, where you've got exactly the same two people debating each other. Like they're perfectly fine, they're happy out with it, but I think I can totally understand the rhetoric from RTE. But like debates are up there with the senior hurling thing for like things that Polcore like whip themselves into a frenzy over.
Yeah, and they really don't matter in the end.
There's always some source of outrage, but I think it makes complete sense to let people pick between their 2 Taoiseachs.
Well, maybe none of it matters, and
we can't discount that possibility.
On that note, having skipped through no sporting more sporting metaphors, we're going to I think we'll bring it to an end for this week. Carl and Ellen, has been fantastic having you, and look forward to you'll be reporting for Joe around the country during the election, and plenty of stuff there, and we'll be back next week. Just want to thank everyone who made this show possible: Paddy McKenna, Paul Donegan, Mick Brennan, Emer O'Grady, Ian Boyle, and a special thanks to Alan Kinsella for
no relation, by the way, just
no relation. But he's provided all our election memorabilia here, which is fantastic, and we'll be back next week. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and wherever you get your podcast. See you next time.